Greetings. My name is John Gabriel, and this is the New Calculus channel. Today, I shall be starting the first in a series, and I don't know how long this will continue, possibly until the end of time, I suppose, because there is so much to talk about and so much to discuss that it's not even possible for me to set a time limit and to be able to understand how long it can take. At any rate, this series is called What Your Ignorant Educators Could Not Tell You. And it's very different from my unpublished book, which is What You Had to Know in Mathematics, but Your Educators Could Not Tell You. There's no connection there. But I will attempt, in any case, to show you how we got all the concepts that work in mathematics today in a sound fashion. In other words, without using any ill-formed concepts, without assuming beliefs, which are axioms and postulates, and also to show you how you can start with absolute nothing, a void universe and nothing in it, and derive everything that you need to know in mathematics. So let's begin with the very first in the series. Now, while this is firing up, what I'd like to tell you is that if you have a void universe, it's necessary not to take anything for granted and to realize that you cannot build on anything that you haven't already established. And that's how this series is going to be. We're not going to add anything in mathematics for which there is no sound foundation. For example, you're never going to be told in any of this part here what does it mean, for example, to have a definition. Well, a definition will be given, but it doesn't have to be a definition that is accepted on faith. It has to be a definition that one can prove to be well-formed. Okay, so nothing is taken for granted. You cannot believe anything you're told, and you have to prove everything from the beginning till the end. There are no axioms or postulates in sound mathematics, only in the flawed mainstream mathematics do you have axioms and postulates. So let's begin. Now, it's important to look up the meaning of words. And it's important because many people are not mathematically inclined. You cannot even take an academic seriously who says, this is not what the word means mathematically. That is just absolute rubbish. When we use a particular word, we use it because it has an existing definition or it has come to mean something. And that is the way we use it. So you can do orangutan or monkey business like the mainstream academics by deciding, oh, we don't like the ancient Greeks' definition of tangent, and we don't, the tangent line, and we don't like Newton's definition of the tangent line, so we'll just change it and tell everybody, ooh, well, that's not what it means in mathematics. Nonsense. Something is given a meaning, and that is what is associated with a word, and that's why it's important to be aware of what a word means in simple English language. And to put things in a better perspective, we cannot even begin to accept the rot of Wittgenstein, his ridiculous theories about logic, and also the idiocies of Bertrand Russell and David Hilbert and all the other morons who came before me. We have to place everything in the right order, interpret and communicate using the English language. And for example, Wittgenstein will say that we can eliminate ambiguity. But that is total nonsense. There is no way to eliminate ambiguity, but there is a way of clarifying what something means. So the irony is that Wittgenstein thinks or thought that English is ambiguous, but English is made up of symbols. The words are symbols, okay? So just at a very superficial level, even beginning to think along the lines of Wittgenstein, his approach is very confusing. It doesn't actually lead to understanding. It just leads to more axioms, beliefs, and more rules or decrees, which have no place in knowledge. We don't want religion in knowledge, okay? Decrees and rules are made primarily by religious people and those who are interpreted to be the leaders, the political leaders of countries or groups, etc. We don't have any of that here. There are no gods here. There are no priests. There is no religion. We don't have to accept anything on faith. So let's see. A concept is defined as something conceived in the brain. This suggests plainly that everything we know is conceived in our brains. But is all knowledge conceived in our brains? Well, knowledge we haven't thought of or realized is also based on concepts. So, what about that? Isn't that a problem? I think it is. Does this mean that if we didn't think of something or a concept, that it does not exist as knowledge? I don't think so. Knowledge is defined as facts or information. It is therefore immediately clear that we seldom know all the facts. And so it follows that knowledge exists without us thinking of it. And moreover, that concepts can exist outside of our brain. So you might hear some overeducated moron say, oh, well, if it's not in my brain, it can't exist. Well, hoo-ha, I say great, because they're so stupid that if everything had to be in their brains, we wouldn't know anything. I can't tell you how many stupid academics I've met who think this particular way. Now, in spite of all the fact that knowledge is learned, and if learned, it follows that it must exist outside of the brain, okay? And we'll see that it doesn't even have to exist in any other brain. Okay, let's continue. So, excuse me. We have facts that no one knows or has thought about. Where do these facts live, if not inside some brain? Do you see the problem there with that kind of thinking? That means also it's total rot, because if it's not already inside your brain, it means you can't learn it. So you can't acquire any new knowledge. But yet the fact that we learn contradicts that bogus paradigm of thinking. But what do we call these concepts which exist outside of our brains? It is a paradox that these concepts can exist outside of our brains, given that the word concept implies an origin inside our brains. So it appears that we can realize concepts that do not originate in any brain. And these concepts can possibly originate or arise in the brain of another, or remain unknown, in other words, in no one's brain. And we'll see some examples. But do unknown facts ever cease to be or exist? Of course not. Such facts have always existed and continue to exist regardless of any brain or sentient being. An excellent example comprises the sound concepts of Euclidean geometry. I mean, it doesn't matter if we ever thought of a point or a location or a line or a circle or pi, the ratio pi. They'd still exist as perfect concepts. We don't need to think of them. They exist independently of our brains or any other brain. So whether you like it or not, these things have always existed, and the ancient Greeks were amongst the first humans to realize these eternal concepts. And that, by the way, is about the only way I can understand the bogus concept of infinity. That is, in terms of noumena, or inanimate knowledge that has always existed. Okay? And there's also a problem with the word knowledge, but we'll see in a little while what knowledge means. Let's not jump the gun. Does this mean that any concept we imagine has always existed? What if a concept is ill-formed? That is, a concept that is devoid of all facts and or leads to contradictions. So, I mean, you can just look at this liar called Donald Trump, who leads the United States, and he's a good example of a concept that is ill-formed, and all the morons that are in his Republican caucus. Well, how can we know if a realized concept is not an ill-formed concept? Surely one clue is that if the concept has always existed, it must be so. This leads us to ponder what constitutes a well-formed concept, and some way of determining whether it is well-formed or not. In particular, the question is, how can we know a concept always exists, or has always existed and shall continue to exist? Right? Let's see. There are concepts that are not based on facts. So obviously such concepts are not well-formed. Okay? If it's not based on a fact, then it must be belief or myth or axiom or postulate. Okay? So now some so-called axioms and postulates are actually facts, but they've never been derived systematically from nothing. And therefore, it's purely on faith that they've been accepted. But in this series, I'm going to show you that you can derive all those so-called axioms and postulates from nothing, that they have a very logical origin and can be systematically derived from nothing. You must excuse the repetition because as a teacher, I do tend to repeat some things. It helps those who are not that bright to learn. And I'm not saying that you're all not bright, but there are some of you who might be annoyed by the fact that I repeat things. Well, I can't help you there. Furthermore, there are no inanimate facts that could lead to the realization of a unicorn by any given sentient being, okay? Therefore, the realization of a unicorn requires human beings or living beings which have not always been, right? Think about that for a while. Evidence that suggests a sound concept has always existed, currently exists, and continues to exist forever. This concept is produced in the form of facts, okay? So a fact is knowledge that is indisputably and irrefutably the case, right? So we define a noumenon to be such a perfect concept. In other words, one that exists forever, is sound, exists outside of any human thought, and can be realized by any sentient being. So therefore, if a concept is not perfect, if any concept is not perfect, then it cannot be a noumenon. By the way, the word noumenon comes from a Greek word, nous, which means of the mind or the brain. And the words brain and mind are synonyms. Now, all noumena must exist independently of any brain or mind so that the sentient being can realize the same. If whatever one imagines is not a noumenon, then it cannot be a well-formed concept, because not all sentient beings will be able to realize it independently. Do you get that? If it can't be realized independently, it's not a noumenon, and hence not a perfect concept. So, to make it easier for you to understand, suppose you have the concept of a circle and diameter being realized by sentient beings in different worlds. Do you think that in any of these worlds, these concepts will be realized differently? The answer is obviously no. So let's summarize. we first ask what it means for a concept to be well defined. That's the starting point. And the answer to this question is that the concept must be a nomenon. All right. And we know what is a nomenon. A nomenon is a perfect concept. And we know what are the attributes of a perfect concept. Okay. And I've listed some of the attributes down here. The main attribute is that it must be recognized independently, as you see down here, that it exists independently of any brain and mind, and it must be recognized independently. But the way we can tell if a new concept we realize is in fact a nomenon is by checking it using these steps. So the first three steps are attributes that are possessed by well-formed concepts, or nomenon, or nomena. Any concept that is derived systematically from a nomenon is also well-formed, provided that it has the same attributes that are listed below. So for example, the only thing to do is to check that a new concept derived from known noumena has the first three basic attributes. And these are the first three basic attributes. It must be reifiable. Okay, what does reifiable mean? In other words, it must be able to construct an instance of the concept in some form, either tangible or intangibly, right? So reification means the same thing as instantiation. And those of you who are software developers will know what I mean by that. You have certain abstract objects which you define, and then when you actually allocate, which you declare actually, or define, and when you actually allocate memory for them, then they become real. You're instantiating them, okay? So there's a slight difference between declaring some kind of object and then defining it, all right? And also assigning a value to it, etc. So this, somebody who's done software development should be able to understand this a little easier. It's not always the case, but be that as it may. The second point is that a concept must be defined in terms of attributes or properties which it possesses, not those it lacks, okay? Not those that it lacks. So for example, what on earth is an irrational number? It's a number which is not rational, so it does not possess the property that it can be expressed as a ratio. That doesn't tell me anything about the irrational number. So the last concept is that it must not lead to any logical contradictions. So if there is any inconsistency in a new concept that is being derived from noumena, then if it passes the first three tests, it essentially graduates to a nomenon itself, or can be established to be a nomenon, so that the fourth requirement is fulfilled. That is, it exists independently of any brain and mind and can be realized by any sentient being. So there is no circularity in the determination of well-formedness. Now, in only 7 pages, I have given you a lot of information, and this is not something you can understand in 1 or 2 readings. So I will provide a link to this PowerPoint, which you can actually download and you can study in your own time. It's very important, because if you do not understand these basic concepts, you cannot understand how the ancient Greeks thought. This is how they realized the sound concepts of geometry and how they established the foundations of mathematics, which were misinterpreted by fools in the mainstream. So, for example, Sir Thomas Heath, who interpreted the elements, did a pretty good job, but he missed a lot of important points. And he failed miserably when he thought that the 5 requirements were axioms, or are axioms and postulates. They're not. The word axiom and postulate doesn't even appear in ancient Greek texts. In fact, there was no word for axiom or postulate at the time that the elements were written. So, I hope you've enjoyed this first part in the series, and in the next part we will continue to see how we can derive all the concepts from nothing in a perfect way. We will begin with the concept of location in a void universe, and we'll take our time. We'll do this slowly. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comment section, and don't give me questions with an attitude, because I'll just ignore you. Also, please click on like, so that there are about 5 or 6 individuals who are my subscribers who don't even watch the videos. They simply vote them down. So if you don't click on like, no one is going to learn this precious knowledge, which has not been revealed to any human being before this time, except in dribs and drabs, and as I have been able to do in previous videos. So I'm going to attempt to be as thorough and as accurate as I can in the series. And so please become a subscriber, tell your friends about it, and I hope to see you soon, or have your attention again in part 2 of the series. This is a new calculus channel. My name is John Gabriel. Till next time, goodbye.